region that for many lay beyond the known world, there stands a legendary place whose mysteries still amaze science today. A lost island that has experienced realities as controversial as that of its civilization, which almost disappeared due to the construction of giant heads, in a society where the powerful could have several wives, but also with surprising female freedom, which allowed many women to have several temporary lovers at once before choosing whom to form a partnership with. In this new video from Uncensored World, we will learn more about Easter Island, one of the most enigmatic corners of the Earth. Known as Rapa Nui by its inhabitants, this island was home to one of the most beautiful and powerful Polynesian civilizations of antiquity, which almost disappeared completely due to a mystery related to its trees, which you will soon discover. A place full of unique curiosities, considered the most remote inhabited island on the planet, with only one village and more Moai, its enigmatic giant stone heads, than inhabitants. This island has also been used by NASA as an emergency landing strip for the space shuttle. An island as legendary as the tradition of the Birdman, in which every year the bravest young men competed in an extreme, often deadly race, climbing huge cliffs and swimming dozens of kilometers to a nearby islet to bring back the first egg of a seabird. A tradition in which the winner not only gained prestige and power for his clan, but also the right to conquer the most desirable women on the island. Pay attention, and don't miss this video because discovering Easter Island with us will surprise you more than you can imagine. Let's get started. On a small island hidden in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from any other known place, stands a legendary place whose mysteries still amaze science today. A lost island known as Rapa Nui by the ancients, or Easter Island to the modern world, also known as the Island of the Birdman. Its original name, Rapa Nui, means Big Rapa, and refers to the Polynesian word Rapa as the name of islands and Nui, which means big or important, highlighting the relevance of this island within its world. A similar name to another name used by the ancient inhabitants, who called it Te Pito o Te Henua, which means the navel of the world. Over the years, and with the arrival of colonizers, the island was named Easter Island by the Europeans, who first sighted it on Easter Sunday, hence the name by which it is known in the modern world. Today, Easter Island belongs to Chile, although it is more than 3,500 kilometers from the American continent and more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest populated island in the Pacific. Its extreme isolation makes it one of the most remote populated places on the planet, a record it still holds today because it has been continuously inhabited for millennia, which sets it apart from other perhaps more remote places, such as Tristan da Cunha, which was settled only a few centuries ago. To understand life on Easter Island, it is essential to learn about its ancestral civilization, the ancient inhabitants of Rapa Nui, whose current descendants maintain many of their traditions, customs, and realities. The Rapa Nui were a Polynesian people who arrived on this island in giant canoes after journeys of hundreds or even thousands of kilometers across this wild and unpredictable ocean, guided by the stars, birds, and their instinct for navigation. From childhood, the Rapa Nui learned to read the sea and the sky. They could not conceive of life without water and without sailing, as their survival depended on mastering the ocean. This mastery was reflected in their most enigmatic rituals, such as that of the Birdman, or Tangata Manu, an extreme contest that arose as part of their religious cult and beliefs about fertility and power. During this ritual, participants had to swim to a distant islet, climb steep cliffs hundreds of meters high, and then swim for miles in the wild waters of the ocean to an island where they could retrieve the first egg of a seabird they revered. A challenge that could be, and often was, lethal. The winner of the Birdman competition gained prestige and power for his clan, and in some cases, the right to win the favor of the most beautiful women on the island, consolidating his status within this society. Polynesian genetics, marked by harmonious features and physical endurance, were combined with a diet rich in seafood, fresh fish, seabirds, and local tubers such as yams and sweet potatoes, foods that provided energy and strengthened their bodies for the arduous days at sea and on land. Added to this was a cult of the body and physical health that permeated their entire culture. From a young age, they trained to swim, climb cliffs, and row long distances, activities essential for survival in such an isolated and demanding environment. Every ritual, every dance, every preparation for competitions, such as the extreme challenge of the Birdman, was also a demonstration of strength, endurance, and beauty. Aesthetics, therefore, was directly linked to functionality. A strong and agile body was not only attractive, but also essential for survival and social status. The choice of a partner, rituals, and ceremonies reflected this harmony between health, beauty, and physical ability. Rapa Nui society understood that the life force of each individual was also the life force of the community, and that only the most prepared bodies could honor the ancestors, protect the island, and perpetuate their culture. Surely the most famous and mythical of the ancient inhabitants of Rapa Nui are the Moai, those immense stone sculptures, which in many cases are just giant heads, and which seem to watch over and protect the entire island. These Moai get their name from the word Moai, which in the Rapa Nui language means statue or image. Each Moai was built to honor a prominent ancestor of the clan, functioning as a channel to concentrate their life force, known as mana. The inhabitants of Rapa Nui believed that this spiritual energy protected the community and ensured prosperity, fertility, and success in fishing and agriculture. Therefore, far from being mere sculptures, the Moai were a tangible symbol of the connection between the living and their ancestors. By erecting them, the Rapa Nui not only paid homage to their leaders and warriors, but also reinforced the identity of each clan and the social hierarchy on the island. The construction and placement of a Moai were therefore sacred and communal acts, in which the entire population participated, reinforcing unity and respect for this ancestral tradition. The tallest Moai measured more than 10 meters and could weigh more than 80 tons, a reality that, when we consider it and know that after creating them, they had to be lifted and sometimes moved for kilometers, probably makes you wonder, how did they move them? To move them, the Rapa Nui used a collective system of wooden rollers, levers, and a coordinated effort that could involve hundreds of people for days or weeks. Some Moai were transported more than 20 kilometers over uneven terrain and dangerous slopes. Any fall could destroy the statue and kill those moving it. This need to move the Moai had a devastating effect on the island's resources, as it required the felling of large numbers of trees, contributing to changes that nearly wiped out its population. But before discovering this catastrophe, it is important to understand other fascinating and controversial aspects of Rapa Nui society. Among these realities, few know that polygamy was common among the island's powerful men, who could have several wives and concubines. These unions strengthened alliances and ensured offspring, a vital necessity in such a remote place. At first glance, knowing this detail might lead one to think that Rapa Nui society was deeply patriarchal and that women lacked freedoms. However, the reality was very different. Women played an active role in choosing their intimate partners, being able to have temporary relationships before deciding who would be their permanent husband, according to a tradition known as tumu matua, a socially accepted reality closely linked to fertility and the continuity of the community. These practices help to ensure offspring in an isolated and fragile ecosystem, vital for the survival of the population on an island where the distance to the next inhabited settlement was more than 2,000 kilometers. The traditional Hoko dance, which took place during festivals such as the Birdman festival, reflects the strength, skill, and beauty of the ancestral practices of Rapa Nui. Its movements were intense and, in many cases, very sensual, evoking ancient rituals of fertility and power, and it is believed that they could even lead to intimate encounters as part of the connection between the community, nature, and the gods. Beauty, relationships, extreme competitions, but above all their culture, had a lot to do with the fact that at its critical point, the island's population fell to less than 100 individuals. A combination of factors that we will now discover in more detail. We all know that Mother Nature periodically unleashes her power with such force that she can wipe out entire civilizations. But when science discovers that one of the most fascinating kingdoms in the Pacific disappeared overnight without a trace, it is fascinating to understand what could have happened. On this remote island lost in the middle of the Pacific, where one of the most enigmatic civilizations the world has ever known flourished, the Rapa Nui. The day came when nature punished its inhabitants, leaving a mystery that still fascinates us today. Their fame transcended generations, as they were the masters of the Moai, colossal stone heads that emerge from the earth like immobile giants. These sculptures not only embodied the power of their ancestors, but also became symbols of a kingdom that seemed invincible, yet ultimately disappeared. The Rapa Nui, isolated from the rest of the world by thousands of miles of ocean, developed a fascinating culture marked by their connection to the divine. They believed that their gods and ancestors had the power to grant prosperity or punishment, and that the life force known as mana resided in the statues they erected. For them, each Moai was much more than a work of stone. It was their guardian and protector, a connection to the supernatural. The process of erecting these sculptures was as enormous as it was mysterious. The Moai, some over 10 meters tall and weighing dozens of tons, were carved from volcanic tuff, extracted from Rapanui, a volcano on Easter Island whose quarry became the heart of their sacred art. Once constructed, through a titanic collective effort, the Moai were transported for miles until they were placed on ceremonial platforms called ahu. To move them, the Rapa Nui used large quantities of wood, logs that served as rollers or levers. What no one among the Rapa Nui suspected was that this act of devotion contained the seeds of their own apocalypse. Each statue required the relentless felling of the forests that covered the island, until the green paradise that had sustained them began to disappear under their hands. For centuries, this practice was the basis of their splendor. Each new Moai that stood facing the sea was a proclamation of their power and devotion. However, unbeknownst to them, the very greatness that made them feared and respected was sowing the seeds of their destruction. It was not until just a few decades ago that various scientific and archaeological studies began to reveal the secrets hidden beneath the earth and in the oral traditions of the Rapa Nui. Analyzing the soil, pollen remains, and ancient accounts, researchers discovered something disturbing. At the time of the Rapa Nui decline, the island no longer had any trees. An ecosystem that had been fertile and green for millennia had become a barren landscape, ravaged by erosion and scarcity. The mystery became increasingly disturbing. How could a people capable of erecting such extraordinary monuments have caused the total disappearance of the Rapa Nui? The answer seemed to lie in the Moai themselves, and in the fact that such devotion to their gods and ancestors had led them to consume the island's resources without restraint. Trees were felled to move the statues without anyone imagining that their absence would trigger irreversible environmental collapse. Without trees, the land began to dry up, the soil lost its fertility, and rainfall became increasingly scarce. Water became increasingly difficult to obtain, and with it, disappeared the crops that had sustained the population. The birds that once filled the island's skies stopped nesting on its shores, and the sea, devoid of boats capable of sailing it, became an unreachable horizon. The Rapa Nui had transformed their paradise into a desert of stone and wind, from which, without boats, they could not escape. And with the land barren and the climate disrupted, new inclemencies also arrived. Hurricane-force winds, sudden storms, and even tornadoes that had previously been mitigated by the forests, lashing a people who could barely resist. Thus, slowly, this civilization was consumed from within. Hunger, internal wars, and spiritual crises marked the end of a culture that seemed destined for eternity. And yet, a mystery still persists. Although much of their people disappeared, some of the inhabitants managed to survive. Their descendants now inhabit Easter Island, guarding the traces of their ancestors and preserving traditions that withstood disaster, like guardians of a doomed yet immortal kingdom that you are now discovering. If you liked this story, don't forget to give us a like and tell us what you thought. Thank you. In recent times, attempts have been made to repopulate the island with trees, reintroducing species to restore what was once a lost forest. But the landscape will never be the same again, and every tree trunk that grows on that soil seems to remind humanity of the fragility of human creations. Historical deforestation and the transformation of this ecosystem led to the disappearance of many species endemic to the island, so that today there are no birds or mammals native to Rapa Nui. This is the main reason why the current population depends heavily on fishing, seafood, and limited agriculture, adapting to an environment that was once much more fertile and diverse. For any visitor, surely the most striking and desirable feature of this island is its majestic Moai, those enigmatic giant stone heads that still stand as they did thousands of years ago. For much of the island's recent history, the Moai outnumbered the inhabitants due to deforestation and the collapse of resources that almost led this enigmatic civilization to extinction. Today, the population has increased and exceeds the number of Moai, with approximately 7,750 people, concentrated mainly in the only existing village, Hangaroa. Hangaroa is the heart of modern life on Easter Island. Most services are located here, although the island still maintains its remote and isolated character. There are a few hotels, around 20 establishments ranging from small hostels to luxury hotels, allowing tourists to enjoy the island with all the basic amenities. However, there are limitations. ATMs are scarce and do not always work, and internet access, although available, can be irregular in some areas, reminding visitors how far they are from any large city. Over the years, attempts have been made to repopulate the island with new families and inhabitants, but most of the current residents are direct descendants of the ancient Birdmen and the first Polynesian settlers. This genetic continuity has created unique characteristics among the population, including physical and cultural traits found nowhere else in the world. For centuries, inbreeding was common, including marriages between distant cousins, which consolidated genetic traits and traditions, although today these practices have significantly declined. Life in Hangaroa combines the ancient and the modern, which is why the ancestral Rapanui language is still spoken by many inhabitants, although Spanish has been integrated as the main language for education and commerce. Ancestral traditions, such as fishing, navigation, and rituals linked to the Moai, continue to be part of the local identity. Among them, the Birdman festival, which in ancient times involved dangerous competitions to bring back the first egg of a seabird, is now symbolically maintained on the island as part of the festival known as Tapati. Although it is no longer performed with the same mortal risk as in the past, young people participate in recreational competitions that evoke the skill, courage, and endurance of their ancestors, keeping alive the memory of those dangerous, legendary rituals. With the arrival of European settlers and the influence of the Christian religion, many of the ancient social practices of Rapa Nui began to change. Polygamy, which in ancient times allowed men of greater power to have multiple wives, is no longer common on the island, and intimate relationships are now regulated according to contemporary norms. As for women, the ancestral practice known as tumu matua, in which they could have several temporary lovers before choosing their future husband, is no longer maintained. Today, relationships are much more conventional, although each person's autonomy to choose a partner within the community is still respected. Even so, the importance of maintaining women's freedom and active participation in decisions about family and social life is recognized, reflecting a balance between tradition and modernity. The island now has churches, and most of the population identifies as Christian, which has led to an adaptation of ancient traditions within a modern religious framework, without completely eliminating the cultural memory of their ancestors. Even so, the culture of Rapa Nui maintains a unique balance between past and present. Young people continue to practice traditional dances, celebrations, and rites related to fertility and life force, albeit in a more symbolic than literal way. The teaching of history and ancestral customs is integrated into local education, and the community preserves its language, oral stories, and connection to the sea and nature. This coexistence between ancestral heritage and modernity creates a unique society where Polynesian roots blend with contemporary life, shaping an identity that is found nowhere else on the planet. If you've made it this far, you're probably interested in knowing how you can travel to ancient Rapa Nui and enjoy its traditions and Moai statues. That's why we at Uncensored World have done extensive research to help you plan your visit in the best way possible. Getting to the island is much easier today than in the past, thanks to aviation. In the past, any journey to Rapa Nui was a wild and dangerous expedition across the Pacific, but today it can be easily reached by plane. From the Americas, direct flights depart mainly from Santiago, Chile, with a journey time of around 5 hours to the island. From Mexico or the United States, you first have to fly to Santiago and then take a domestic flight. From Europe, for example, Madrid, the most common option is to fly to Santiago and then connect with the flight to Rapa Nui. A round-trip ticket from Madrid can cost around 1,000 euros, while from Mexico City or New York prices can vary between $800 and $1,200, depending on the season. As for visas, citizens of most countries do not require a visa for short tourist stays, although it is necessary to carry a valid passport and, in some cases, up-to-date vaccination certificates. The cost of living on the island is higher than in most mainland Chilean destinations due to its isolation and the need to import almost everything. For example, a meal in a restaurant can cost between $15 and $30. A coffee can cost around $3 or $4, and accommodation in mid-range hotels varies between $80 and $150 per night. However, there are cheaper options in hostels and family accommodations, allowing you to tour the island on a moderate budget. It is possible to tour Rapa Nui on foot, but it is worth bearing in mind that the island is approximately 160 square kilometers, similar in size to the island of Majorca. This allows you to visit many of the Moai and nearby archaeological sites, but to explore most of the iconic places such as Rano Raraku, Ahu Tongariki, or the Orongo Cliffs, it is most convenient to rent a car or bicycle. There are also local transportation services such as minibuses and taxis, although their frequency may be limited outside of Hangaroa, the only major town on the island. Among the most interesting places not to be missed are the Moai statues of Ahu Tongariki, the Rano Kau volcano with its impressive crater and inland lagoon, the ceremonial site of Orongo, where the Birdman ritual was performed, and the beaches of Anakina, with white sand and crystal-clear waters. In addition, strolling through Hangaroa allows you to learn about the daily life of the inhabitants, enjoy local markets, and observe how ancestral culture mixes with modernity. With all this information, your visit to Rapa Nui is sure to be safe, fascinating, and full of discoveries, allowing you to connect with one of the most enigmatic and admired civilizations in Polynesian history. At Uncensored World, we hope you found this video as interesting as we did, and that it helped you discover the legendary Easter Island, one of the most enigmatic jewels on the planet. If so, don't hesitate to leave us a like and a comment. It's the best way to help us continue working to bring you interesting content like this every week. Or like this video you can now watch to discover another of the most fascinating places on the planet. Click on it. You're going to enjoy it.